November 12, 2006. A quiet cemetery in Pittsburgh becomes a crime scene. The FBI is here to dig up a priest who died 12 years ago. They're looking for evidence. Evidence of what happened to 11 boys who vanished without a trace. This is a story of America's most mysterious mass disappearance. And the secret one man took to his grave. In the working-class neighborhood of Lawrenceville, life feels predictable. Safe, even. People know their neighbors by name. Doors stay unlocked. Kids race bikes down hills. And only head home when the streetlights buzz to life. At the center of the neighborhood stands St. Anthony's Parish, a proud old brick church with stained glass that glows like colored fire whenever the light hits it. On Sundays, the pews are packed so tightly that latecomers stand in the back. And leading it all is Father Thomas Brennan, the priest everyone simply calls Father Tom. Charismatic, warm, someone who never forgets a birthday or a family milestone. The kind of man who coaches Little League in the afternoons and spends his evenings visiting the sick. People trusted him. They trusted the church. They trusted the world they'd built around it. But in the summer of 1980, something subtle shifts. Something no one quite sees at first. One altar boy stops showing up. Then another. 11 boys in total. Disappearing quietly over the course of weeks. And the most haunting part is that, at first, nobody notices. Not really. Not in a way that sets off alarms. It's only later, when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore, that the community realizes the truth. Something terrible has begun right under their noses. And by the time they understand what's happening, it's already too late. June 14, 1980. A warm Saturday morning. 12-year-old Bobby Kowalski steps out of his house on Butler Street just after 9, his sneakers slapping the sidewalk as he heads toward the church. He's got that wide, gap-toothed grin in every photo from that summer, the kind that makes him look younger than 12. He tells his mom he's going to practice for the evening mass. Father Brennan wants to run through the readings, make sure everything is perfect. It's a 10-minute walk, a route he's taken dozens of times. His mother watches him go, proud in that small, everyday way. He loves being an altar boy. He loves the robe, the rituals, the attention from Father Tom. She never imagines this will be the last time she sees him. By 7 that evening, Bobby still hadn't come home. She calls the church. No answer. At 8, she calls the police. The officers do what they always did back then. They canvass the neighborhood. They knock on doors. They check along the rivers just in case he fell. They eventually find his bike, still locked to the metal railing outside St. Anthony's. But there's no sign of Bobby. Back then, missing kids were almost always filed under runaway. That's where everyone's minds went. A phase, a misunderstanding, something that would fix itself in a day or two. No one wants to think darker. 2 weeks slide by. June 28, 1980. Another boy vanishes. 13-year-old Michaelchin doesn't come home after stopping by the church to help prepare for Sunday service. He lives just 3 blocks from the Kowalskis. Another altar boy. Another child trusted by the parish. His parents, who still speak halting English, report him missing at 9. They try to answer the detective's questions as best they can, but they're frightened, confused, and deeply respectful of the church. They can't imagine anyone there hurting their son. Now, 2 boys from the same parish have disappeared in 3 weeks. Both altar boys. Both were last seen heading toward St. Anthony's. And as uneasy as the neighborhood feels, the truth is, the worst is only beginning. July 4th, 1980. Independence Day in Pittsburgh. Fireworks crackling over the river. Families cheering. Kids running around with sparklers. And right in the middle of all that noise, another boy disappears without anyone noticing. Tommy Sullivan's photo flickers on screen. Freckles, a shy smile, a fishing rod, like he's posing for a summer catalog. Tommy Sullivan, age 11, last seen at St. Anthony's Church on July 4th, helping Father Brennan set up for holiday mass. A list begins to form beside him. Bobby Kowalski, June 14th Michaelchin, June 28th Tommy Sullivan, July 4th. Now there were 3 boys gone, all altar boys, all from St. Anthony's Parish. You can almost feel the quiet fear settling over the neighborhood. Parents whispering on porches. Kids who used to ride their bikes till sunset now watch the streets from behind screen doors. Panic spread through Lawrenceville. Parents kept their kids indoors. Search parties formed. People combed abandoned buildings, wooded paths, and the old railroad tracks. Anything. Missing posters flap on telephone poles in the summer breeze. On July 10th, the FBI stepped in and set up a command center downtown. They interviewed everyone tied to St. Anthony's. Priests, nuns, teachers, and parish workers. They dug through records of local offenders. Nothing pointed anywhere. Then July 19th arrived, and somehow things got worse. Two more faces appear. David Martinez, Kevin O'Brien. Both are wearing their altar robes. David Martinez, 12. Kevin O'Brien, 13. They both told their parents the same thing. They were heading to church. And neither of them came home. The list fills out again, longer now, almost unbelievable. Bobby Kowalski, June 14th, Michael Chin, June 28th, Tommy Sullivan, July 4th, David Martinez, July 19th, Kevin O'Brien, July 19th. 5 boys in 5 weeks, all connected to the same church. And then, in early August, everything broke open. 6 more boys vanished in a single week. The first week of August 1980 felt like the whole city was holding its breath. Pittsburgh pulled its kids in close. Parents walked their children to the corner store, to the park, even each other's houses. Summer programs shut down. Streets that used to echo with bikes and laughter suddenly felt hollow. But none of it changed what happened next. One photo after another flashes by. James Murphy on August 1st. Anthony Russo on August 2nd. Christopher Lee on August 3rd. Daniel Foster on August 5th. Robert Jackson on August 6th. William Hayes on August 7th. 6 boys. 7 days. By then, the number was almost impossible to grasp. 11 altar boys from St. Anthony's Parish. All between 11 and 14. All gone. Helen Kowalski tries to explain it years later, but even her voice can't quite hold the weight of that summer. The whole city was terrified. Nobody understood how this could happen. Where were they? Were they together? Were they alive? The FBI doubled down, then tripled down. More than 50 agents swarmed the case. They interviewed thousands of people. They searched every square inch of St. Anthony's Church, the basement with its dusty storage rooms, the cramped attic no one had stepped into for years, the priest's quarters, the closets, even the crawl spaces, and still nothing. It was like the boys just evaporated. No evidence of foul play. No signs of a struggle. Nothing to even point us in a direction. Then came August 10th. Reporters crowded the steps of St. Anthony's as Father Thomas Brennan stepped up to a microphone. He looked exhausted, haunted. I pray every day for these boys. I pray for their safe return. This parish is devastated. We're cooperating fully with law enforcement. People wanted to believe him, and maybe they did. He seemed sincere. His eyes carried something raw, something heavy. The FBI interviewed him again and again, 7 times. He even passed 2 polygraph tests, but none of it helped. Father Brennan was never charged, and as summer slid into fall, the trail went cold. Days turned into months, then years, and the boys remained missing, swallowed by a mystery that only grew darker every time someone tried to make sense of it. For most people, the story probably should have ended there. An open case, a wound the city learned to live with. But in 2006, an anonymous letter showed up at FBI headquarters, and everything people thought they knew about the case began to shift. The years roll on, and somehow the families keep moving even though a part of them stays frozen in that summer. They hold vigils every June 14th, candles flickering against the dark. They write letters to politicians, hoping someone somewhere will care enough to reopen the case. They hire private investigators, even when the money runs thin. Anything to avoid feeling helpless. Old newspaper headlines fade. Missing posters curl at the edges. But the grief never does. By 1990, most law enforcement agencies quietly accepted what the families refused to say aloud. The boys are probably dead. And yet without bodies, there's nothing solid to hold on to. Just an endless ache, a permanent question mark. Susan Chun remembers the toll it took on her family. She talks about her parents, how the uncertainty hollowed them out over the years. Not knowing can carve deeper than any truth. Meanwhile, Father Thomas Brennan's life shifts into a quieter lane. He left St. Anthony's in 1988 and moved to St. Mary's in Erie. It's far enough from Pittsburgh that people can start to forget his connection to the disappearances, but close enough that the past isn't entirely out of reach. He looks older in photos from that time. The charm people used to talk about seems stripped away. Parishioners remember him as gentle but withdrawn, a man carrying something he never spoke about. On May 3rd, 1994, his story ends without fanfare. A heart attack. 68 years old. His funeral is small, almost lonely, and none of the families from Lawrenceville went. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they wouldn't. He's buried back in Pittsburgh, in the clergy section at St. Michael's Cemetery, under a simple stone that doesn't hint at the storm that once swirled around his name. For 12 quiet years, his grave sits undisturbed. Grass grows. Seasons pass. And then on October 18th, 2006, the piece around Father Brennan's memory cracks open, and the story that everyone thought was over lurches awake again. October 18th, 2006. A normal Wednesday morning at the FBI headquarters in Washington. Agents sorting through reports. Coffee cooling on desks. The usual hum of a place where old mysteries go to wait. Then a plain white envelope arrives in the cold case unit. No return address. Postmarked from Philadelphia. Almost forgettable. Inside are 3 pages written in neat, almost rigid block letters. And from the very first line, the tone changes. It's the kind of letter that stops a room. The writer talks about the 11 missing altar boys. Talks about Father Thomas Brennan. Talks about things no one outside the investigation should have known. Things that were never printed in a newspaper or whispered at a vigil. One line stands out like it's carved in the paper. If you want to know what happened to those boys, dig up Father Brennan. Look in his coffin. He took the truth with him, but not in the way you think. That sentence hangs in the air for a long moment. The FBI tries to learn who sent it. They study the paper, which turns out to be nothing special. The kind you can buy anywhere. The handwriting is stiff, deliberately masked, every letter sharp and identical. The ink's just a basic ballpoint. Whoever wrote it wanted to vanish behind the message, but still be taken seriously. The real weight is in the details of the letter lists. The precise times 3 of the boys were last seen. The exact shade of the lock on Bobby Kowalski's bicycle. What shirt did Michael Chun wear under his altar robe? Tiny, painful facts that only someone close to the truth would carry. So now the FBI faces a decision that feels almost absurd. Dismiss an anonymous letter and risk ignoring the first real lead in decades, or open the grave of a priest who has been buried for 12 quiet years. They choose to dig. November 12, 2006. Just after sunrise at St. Michael's Cemetery in Pittsburgh. The sky is pale and brittle, the kind of morning where your breath hangs in front of you. Frost clings to the grass like a thin layer of glass. Unmarked FBI vehicles roll through the gates, quiet, purposeful. Yellow tape stretches between headstones. Cemetery workers wheel out equipment with the sort of reverence you only see in places like this. The agents have a court order. They've told no reporters, no families, no one except the people who absolutely need to know. No reason to stir hope until they're sure there's something to hope for. At 7:30, the digging starts. It's slow at first, just a scrape of shovels breaking the ground. Then the louder grind as machinery takes over. Father Brennan's grave sits 6 feet down beneath a concrete vault heavy enough to anchor a small boat. By 9 o'clock, they hit it. Mud cake, cold, solid. Chains are hooked on. A crane winds as it hauls the vault upward, inch by inch, until it finally emerges from the earth. Inside a white tent, the vault is set down. Agents pull on masks and gloves. A medical examiner steps forward, clipboard in hand, the kind of calm focus you only get from years of facing the dead. No one really knows what they're about to see. 12 years in the ground can do a lot. At 10:15, they open a coffin. Inside lies Father Brennan's body, just as the burial records described. Vestments still draped over him, hands gently folded, the ordinary calm of death. But then someone notices something resting beneath the folds of fabric. A metal box, waterproof, heavy, about the size of a shoebox. No keyhole visible. They cut it open. The crack of metal snapping echoes inside the tent. And what's inside that box doesn't just raise questions. It shatters everything the FBI thought they understood about Father Thomas Brennan and what happened during that terrible summer in 1980. Inside the metal box is a stack of 47 pages, the paper yellowed at the edges, the ink still steady and dark. Each sheet is dated April 1994, just weeks before Father Brennan died. The handwriting is neat, almost painfully careful, as if he knew these words would outlive him. It's a confession, not the hurried scribbles of a guilty man, but a full account of what happened to the 11 altar boys. And the shock is immediate. He didn't take them. He didn't hurt them, but he knew because he helped hide the truth. What he describes is bigger than him, bigger than St. Anthony's, bigger than Pittsburgh, a trafficking ring woven through Catholic churches across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, quietly running through the 1970s and into the early 1980s. The kind of structure built on trust and authority, where respected men could target vulnerable boys and slip them into a hidden system without raising alarms. In the pages, Brennan named 6 other men, 2 priests, a church administrator, a local businessman, a truck driver, a doctor. He spells out how they operated, how they manipulated children with promises of special privileges, retreats, and service trips. No violence at first, just grooming wrapped in the language of faith. For the former agents who spent years on the case, the confession is devastating. It answers questions no one could touch for decades, but the truth is heavier than any theory they ever imagined. And then there's the part Brennan labeled, Why I Stayed Silent. It feels raw on the page. He writes about threats, about being warned what would happen to him if he spoke, about choosing self-preservation over the lives of those boys. He calls himself a coward. He begs for forgiveness he never earned. You can almost feel the weight he carried pressing through every sentence. But remorse doesn't rewrite history. Still, the confession leaves one unbearable void. It tells the FBI who. It tells them how. It even tells them why he never spoke. But it doesn't tell them where the 11 boys are now. November 2006. The FBI moves quickly, pulling agents from 6 different states and building a task force that feels more like a small army than an investigative team. They finally have names. Real people. Real targets. After decades of shadows and speculation, they can actually start knocking on doors. 3 of the 6 men Father Brennan named are already dead. 2 from old age and 1 from a suicide back in 1987. That leaves 3 living suspects. And with rumors of the exhumation starting to slip through the cracks, time suddenly feels tight. On November 20th, 2006, agents surround a quiet cul-de-sac in Cleveland. They walk up the driveway of a tidy suburban home and arrest 72-year-old Gerald Mitchum. Neighbors watch through curtains, stunned. Mitchum looks like somebody's kindly grandfather. But in 1980, he was a commercial truck driver, and according to Brennan's confession, he was the one who physically moved the boys out of Pittsburgh. 2 days later, in Buffalo, New York, federal agents take 78-year-old Dr. Raymond Walsh into custody, a retired pediatrician. Decades of diplomas on his wall. Former patients who adored him. But Brennan described him as the medical gatekeeper for the ring, the one who examined the boys before they were transported. When the interrogations begin, both men deny everything. They insist Brennan was unstable, that the entire confession is nothing more than the ramblings of a dying priest. But the FBI has started piecing together fragments that were buried for years. Old phone logs, suspicious financial transfers, travel receipts that match the timelines of the disappearances. Slowly, a shape begins to form. And on November 28th, 2006, after hours of questioning, Gerald Mitchum finally breaks. He leans forward, lowers his voice, and tells investigators something they never expected to hear. His confession leads him to a farm in rural Pennsylvania. For decades, it belonged to the Catholic diocese until it was sold off in 1985. From a distance, it looks ordinary, just an isolated property swallowed by woods. But Mitchum insisted this place was a way station, a holding point, a stop along the route where the boys were kept before disappearing deeper into the network. At dawn, federal agents move in. They came with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a full forensic team. You can almost imagine them stepping through those overgrown fields, brushing past weeds that reach their waists. The barn listing to one side, the farmhouse windows smashed out, everything carrying that feeling of a place forgotten on purpose. Locals had never raised alarms about the property. To most people, it was just an abandoned farm. But the people walking it now sensed that something here mattered, even if they didn't yet know what they were looking for. Remains? Clues? Some sign that Mitchum's story wasn't just another dead end. Inside the old barn, a 40 by 60-foot structure barely holding itself together. The air carried the smell of rust and rot. Old equipment sagged under its own age. Tools eaten by the weather. Hay long since crumbled into dust. And under all that, something else. In the northwest corner, buried beneath decades of debris, the team uncovered a trapdoor. Below it lay a concrete room, 12 feet by 16. No windows, just a narrow set of stairs leading down, and a metal door at the top. The moment you step inside, the purpose of the space feels unmistakable. Chain bolts in the walls. A bucket abandoned in one corner. Scratches etched into the doorframe where someone at some point tried to get out. The team photographed everything, moving slowly, carefully, like each detail mattered. On the walls, carved into concrete, they found names. Bobby K. Michael, Tommy, Minnie Hook, followed by the numbers 89 verse 30. Simple markings, but heavy with implication. Proof that the boys had been here. Or at least some of them had. But the basement was empty now. Silent. Whoever had occupied it was long gone. And that led investigators to the question that would haunt the rest of the search. If this place was only a stopover, then where were they taken next? December 2006. Gerald Mitchum sits alone in an FBI interrogation room. He's already struck his deal. Cooperation for a reduced sentence. You can picture him in that stiff orange jumpsuit, arms on the table, 2 agents waiting for him to finally start telling the truth. When they ask about the boys from St. Anthony's, he keeps his voice flat, almost practiced. He says he only drove them. He drove them to the farm, handed them off, and then someone else took over. As he talks, a larger picture starts forming. He explains how the boys were told they were headed to a special religious retreat, something meant to sound comforting and official. They were kept at the farm for days, sometimes weeks, depending on the schedule. And then, once the timing was right, they were moved further north. Piece by piece, the FBI began stitching together a map of the route, watching it stretch from Pittsburgh up through Pennsylvania, into New York, and finally across the border into Canada. A pipeline masquerading as ministry work, shielded behind legitimate-looking camps, boarding schools, treatment centers, all wrapped in layers of paperwork that made everything look clean from the outside. Then, on December 18th, Dr. Raymond Walsh folds under the weight of the evidence stacked against him. Unlike Mitchum, Walsh kept records. He documented everything. Dates, locations, names. He had thought of himself as meticulous, almost professional about the entire thing. And in a dark, bitter twist, that same meticulousness made him invaluable once he finally agreed to talk. Through Walsh, the fate of the 11 boys becomes clearer. They hadn't stayed together. They were divided into 3 groups. 4 sent to a facility in upstate New York. 3 were taken across the border to Ontario. The remaining 4 stayed somewhere in Pennsylvania. Walsh insists he examined every one of them at the farm, and that all of them were alive when they left his care. What happened afterward, he claims, is beyond his knowledge. But with both men talking, the FBI suddenly has enough to move, enough to act, enough to stop searching blindly in the dark. And so they launch simultaneous raids across 3 states and 2 countries, pushing forward with the hope that, finally, the truth they've been chasing for decades is waiting on the other side of those doors. January 10th, 2007. Coordinated raids sweep across New York and Pennsylvania. More than 200 federal agents on the ground, backed by local police and child welfare teams. News helicopters circle overhead. Sirens echo. Cameras capture only fragments of what's unfolding. The first location is a former boarding school outside Syracuse. It shut down in 1995, or at least that's what the paperwork says. But the records hint that people still live inside. When the agents breach the front door, the place looks frozen in time. Dark hallways, rotten floorboards, a building that shouldn't still be standing, yet somehow is. Inside, they make their first discovery. 14 people, adults now, somewhere between their 30s and late 40s. They're living in cramped, filthy rooms with barely any light. When the agents approach them, they react with confusion, fear, almost like they're bracing for punishment. Many of them have been here since childhood. They've never left. They never had the chance. None of the 14 trace back to St. Anthony's. But the truth hits just as hard. They're victims of the same machine. Taken as children, hidden away, swallowed by a system built to erase them. Forensic genealogists and medical experts arrive to try to untangle their pasts. It's harder than anyone expects. A lot of them don't remember their real names. Some were assigned new ones. Others only know the nicknames adults gave them decades ago. It takes weeks to sort through bits of memory, scraps of paper, fragments of DNA. And slowly, something emerges. 2 of the survivors fit the age and physical descriptions of boys taken from St. Anthony's. It feels almost impossible, almost unreal. After 27 years, the case that haunted an entire community may finally have 2 living answers. DNA testing is already underway, and for the first time in decades, there's a small, shaking thread of hope. January 25th, 2007, the DNA results come back, and for a moment, the entire investigation seems to stop breathing. 2 of the survivors found in Syracuse matched the families of the missing altar boys. After 27 years, 2 names finally returned to the world. Bobby Kowalski, now 39, and Michael Chun, now 40. Alive. Changed almost beyond recognition, but alive. Old photographs sit beside new ones. The contrast almost unsettling. 2 bright-eyed boys in 1980. 2 haunted men in 2007. You can see the years that were taken from them in every line on their faces. When Bobby's mother is told, she breaks down completely. She tries to explain the feeling, but the words crumble. She buried her son in her mind long ago, convinced she would never see him again. Finding out he's alive feels like a miracle and a cruelty at the same time. 27 years she can never get back. The reunions happen behind closed doors, inside an FBI facility guarded like a fortress. Psychologists sit nearby, social workers stand ready, and medical staff keep watch. The air in those rooms is heavy with shock, disbelief, and a strange, unfamiliar shape of hope. Bobby doesn't recognize his mother at first. The memories are too buried, pushed down so deep that they almost don't feel like they belong to him. It takes days before something clicks. A voice, a gesture, a smell, memories rising like ghosts. Michael's reunion is different. He recognizes his sister immediately, but the recognition feels fragile. He was 12 when he disappeared. She was young herself. And now, the man standing in front of her is 40 years old, shaped by a lifetime spent in captivity. She says it feels like hugging a stranger who knows her name. In the weeks that follow, the 2 men start talking. Slowly, cautiously, their stories come in pieces, as if pulled from underwater. They describe being taken to the farm. They describe being told their families didn't want them anymore. They describe the constant moves, the lies, the punishments, and the way they were conditioned to believe escape was impossible. Psychologists say the manipulation was deliberate, systematic. They were children stripped of identity, reshaped into people who didn't know how to exist outside the walls built around them. By the time they reached adulthood, they weren't prisoners because of chains. They were prisoners because they didn't believe they had anywhere to go. The facility in Syracuse had operated for years under the guise of a group home for troubled youth. No one asked questions. No one checked where the residents came from. It was a forgotten place for forgotten children. But Bobby and Michael are only 2 of 11. Their survival is a breakthrough, but it also sharpens the ache of the unanswered. 9 boys are still unaccounted for. The investigation pushes north across the border into Ontario. A red marker near Toronto becomes the center of attention. And then on February 8, 2007, Canadian authorities uncovered something new, something that brings hope wrapped in heartbreak, and changes the direction of the search all over again. February 8, 2007. A rural property outside Thunder Bay, Ontario, so far from Pittsburgh that feels almost like another world. Royal Canadian Mounted Police surround a compound that's been operating quietly, almost invisibly, since 1982. You can see the cold breath of officers in tactical gear as they move in, heavy boots crunching over snow, flashing lights cutting through the early morning dark. The place belongs to a group called the New Covenant Mission. On paper, it's a rehabilitation program for troubled youth, a place where parents supposedly send their kids to get back on track. But the neighbors have been whispering for years. Strange routines. No one is leaving. Former members speaking about abuse, but with nothing to prove it. The kind of place everyone in town avoids looking at too closely. That changes when the FBI shares its intelligence. Suddenly, there's a warrant. Suddenly, the doors come down. Inside the compound, officers find 32 people, 21 adults, 11 teenagers. All of them are living under rigid control. No phones, no internet, no chance to step outside without permission. The rooms are cramped, bunk beds, sparse furniture, people standing in doorways with blank, cautious eyes, not sure if the world arriving outside is here to help them or harm them. And then the moment investigators have been bracing for. Among the adults, they find 3 men who match the age and physical features of the boys who vanished from St. Anthony's in 1980. Old photos are held up beside new faces. It's uncanny and heartbreaking. Children frozen in time on one side. Their adult selves, on the other hand, were shaped by decades in captivity. February 20th, 2007. DNA confirms the truth. Tommy Sullivan, David Martinez, Kevin O'Brien, all alive. All are somewhere in their late 30s. If you look closely, you can see the boys they once were. But you can also see everything they've endured. The relief in the FBI team is palpable, even to the tired eyes. 5 survivors now. 5 out of 11. More than they dared hope for. But that number also means something else. 6 still missing. 6 stories unresolved. The 3 men from Thunder Bay tell versions of the same story that the others shared. Taken as children, moved like cargo, told their families were gone or had abandoned them. They grew up in isolation. Their world shrank to the walls around them. They never learned to drive, never held official IDs, never attended school past the 8th grade. Their entire adulthood was lived inside a compound that claimed to save them. The New Covenant mission turns out to be less a ministry and more a cult. Members work for free, live collectively. They are punished for questioning authority. Brother Solomon, the man running the operation, controls everything from food to sleep to who speaks to whom. His real name is Marcus Eldridge, a former Catholic deacon who left the church in 1978 and built this community 4 years later. He's been arrested on multiple trafficking charges before the sun even sets. 5 boys were found. 5 lives returned to a world they barely remember. And 5 families are finally getting the news they've been begging for since 1980. But 6 boys are still out there somewhere. Or somewhere in the past tense. And the trail, for a while, goes cold. Completely cold. Until a tip comes in from a source no one on the investigative team sees coming. March 15th, 2007. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A man who knows he's running out of time picks up the phone and calls the FBI tip line. His voice is thin, shaky, but determined. He says he has information about the missing altar boys. His name is Carl Henderson, 73 years old, terminal lung cancer, a man with nothing left to lose, and apparently something he's been carrying for decades. He asks to speak to an agent, says it has to be in person. When Agent Wells arrives at the hospital, Henderson is already fading. He's propped against pillows, Oxygen tubes his nose, the steady beep of a heart monitor filling the room. But his eyes are clear, focused, like he's been waiting for this moment longer than he can admit. He starts from the beginning. Says he worked maintenance at different Catholic properties across Pennsylvania back in the 70s and 80s. Old churches, retreat houses, administrative buildings. Enough places that no one paid much attention to him. And apparently that was the point. He claims he wasn't part of the trafficking network. Not directly. But he helped cover it up. Cleaned things. Destroyed things. Looked the other way because people in collars told him to. Because questioning a priest wasn't something you did back then. Then he tells him about a place he calls a retreat. The name alone sends a chill through the room. He says it wasn't a church. It wasn't a school. It wasn't even on any diocesan paperwork he ever saw. Built like a private psychiatric center. Or at least that's what they told a handful of staff who ever went near it. Remote. Hidden. Off limits unless you were summoned. And Henderson? He was summoned. He describes vans arriving in the dead of night, priests stepping out, other men he didn't recognize, and children crying, shaking, gripping each other's sleeves. He says he was told to burn their clothes. Scrub rooms until they smelled like bleach. Hall-sealed crates to an old incinerator behind the building. Crates that he was ordered never to open. Every detail he gives, it lines up. Priests are already under investigation. Dates that match missing persons' timelines. Locations that fit with the route Mitchum and Walsh described. Wells says it was like listening to the final puzzle piece snap into place. 4 days later, Henderson dies. But before he takes his last breath, he gives the FBI the coordinates. A dirt road, over a mile long, cutting through thick forest, leading to a brick building that no one has checked in decades. And that confession becomes a spark for the largest, most intensive search of the entire 2-year investigation. Because in April 2007, federal agents walked into the retreat, a place time forgot. And what they find inside changes everything. The retreat sits at the end of a lonely gravel road, the kind you almost miss if you blink at the wrong moment. The building itself feels wrong the second you see it. Windowless on 3 sides. Heavy steel doors. No signs, no markings, nothing to hint at what it once was. Just a brick shell holding its secrets a little too tightly. A drone shot glides over the empty parking lot. Cracked asphalt. Weeds are pushing through. Everything's still. Everything is silent in that unsettling way old places get when they've been abandoned by the people who built them. Inside, the first floor looks like every other forgotten medical facility. Dust on the desks. Rust on the old beds. Patient charts curl from age. But the deeper the agents push in the hallways, the more it stops feeling abandoned and starts feeling staged. Like something was shut down deliberately, not left to decay. Agent Santos says the shift happens in the basement. The air gets colder. The walls become thicker. Doors reinforced with steel plates. Heavy commercial locks that look like they belong in a prison more than a hospital. An entire security system humming quietly off an independent generator. Still alive after all these years. Then they find it, a locked metal door at the far end of the basement, rusted around the edges, but holding strong. When they breach it, they discover a staircase. Narrow, steep, leading to a sublevel that doesn't appear on any blueprint or historical record. And this is where the real horror starts. Thick concrete walls. Soundproof insulation, a hallway stretching into dim light. On one side, a row of rooms. Bare. Empty. The kind of emptiness that's worse than any mess. Because the only marks left behind are scratches etched into the walls at a height no adult would reach. Some are lines. Tally marks, maybe. Others are shapes. Names. Attempts at names. Failed attempts. Agent Wells said you could feel it. The panic left behind like fingerprints. In an adjoining office, they find what's left of a ledger. Mold has eaten entire sections of it, but few entries remain. Enough to paint a picture no one wants to see. June 1980, 2 units delivered October 1980. Transferred to New York facility July 1981. pending collection code C7, 3 arrivals unregistered. The handwriting matches a priest who died years ago, a man the FBI had quietly been watching long before this moment. And suddenly all those unrelated threads aren't so unrelated. Then the discovery that stops everyone cold, a steel drawer, locked. When they finally break it open, they find Polaroids. Dozens, some curled at the edges, but still clear enough that faces leap out. Boys, bound, crying, terrified, and some of the faces match the missing posters from St. Anthony's. No bodies, though. No remains. No concrete evidence of what happened after these photographs were taken. Just a building stripped of everything except the shadows of what it once held. And then the single clue that changes the direction of the investigation again. A receipt, dated January 1981, paid in cash, issued by a private airfield less than 50 miles away. And it's made out to one of the names in Father Brennan's confession. The place feels almost too normal at first. Just an old rural airfield on a quiet April morning. The kind of spot where you expect to hear tractors or see a kid on a bicycle cutting across the gravel. But once investigators start digging through the history, the surface normality falls apart. In the early 1980s, this wasn't a sleepy family operation. It had a different owner, different traffic, and disturbing pattern of private flights paid entirely in cash. Agents sort through hours of logs until they find it. A line from January 1981 that matches a receipt discovered at the retreat. A 3:17 a.m. departure with no listed passengers and no recorded destination. Just a takeoff into the dark and then nothing. Inside the old hangar, sunlight leaking through broken panels, the search team pries open 2 long-forgotten crates. What spills out stops everyone in place. A small heap of boys' clothing. An ID card for Daniel F., issued by his church. Medical forms with the signature of Dr. Raymond Walsh. Proof, finally, that the missing altar boys passed through here. Proof that the network moved them. But the moment of clarity is painfully short. The plane itself has been gone for decades. The records were destroyed. The pilot who flew that night died years earlier. Every lead seems to dissolve just as investigators reach for it, like someone wiped the trail clean long before the FBI ever knew it existed. The harder they push, the more impossible the truth feels. Most experts believe the boys were taken far from Pennsylvania, maybe even out of the country, a place where no one would ever ask questions. And without remains or survivors or a single witness willing to come forward, the trail ends in a silence that has lasted more than 25 years. By this point, the investigators know the answer they're inching toward, and it's the one they've dreaded from the beginning. The fate of the boys, the final destination of that January flight, the full scale of the network's operation. It may all remain beyond reach forever. The years that follow feel like the last stretch of a long storm. Between 2007 and 2009, arrests began piling up across Pennsylvania and New York. Not the masterminds everyone hoped for, but the people who kept the machinery running. Priests who signed off on transfers. Administrators who buried paperwork. Employees who looked the other way when a van full of children arrived after midnight. It's progress, technically, but it also feels like justice skimmed the surface and stopped there. Public anger hits a boiling point. Crowds form outside dioceses holding candles, posters, sometimes just raw fury. News cameras follow them, catching grief that's been simmering for decades. Survivors groups step forward with a sharp clarity that no one can ignore anymore. They talk about systems, not individuals. They talk about networks built on silence and protection. People start listening in a way they hadn't before. And then there are the families. The ones who live with missing posters fading in their windows. The investigation gives them pieces of truth they never had. But those pieces cut more than they comfort. They know now the boys were taken. They know they didn't run away or vanish by choice. But that knowledge lands like a stone, not a relief. The questions still left unanswered are the ones that matter most. Where were they taken? What happened after those last confirmed sightings? Why wasn't anyone willing to tell the final part? By 2010, the momentum slows. Agents are reassigned. Leads dry up. And eventually, the Bureau marks the case with a phrase that feels like a door halfway shut. Unresolved but not closed. A file that sits in the dark, waiting for the one unlikely break that might never come. Only one name from Brennan's confession is still unaccounted for. A quiet, forgettable church administrator named Leonard Hale. In the 1979 clergy directory, he looks like the kind of man you'd pass in a hallway without remembering. But in 1991, he simply vanished. No forwarding address. No bank activity. No social security trail. Like he slipped out his own life and erased the door behind him. For years, he's been just a shadow in old paperwork. Then, investigators start tracing tiny threads in financial records and border logs. The path drifts southwest, across state lines, until it settles on a tiny desert town in Arizona. A place where the horizon feels endless, and people tend to arrive with stories they hope never get told. Someone like Hale doesn't disappear alone. He gets help, and usually that help comes from the same networks he served for decades. On January 18th, 2007, agents searched a battered trailer on the edge of town. The air inside is stale. Dust on every surface. A life lived in hiding. The man inside calls himself Henry Lowell, but the fingerprints say otherwise. It's Hale. At first, he's stoned. Denies everything. Says he doesn't know the boys, doesn't know the priests, doesn't know the photographs they slide toward him. But then they show him the pictures from St. Gertrude's. Those young faces frozen in time. And whatever wall he built over the years starts to crack. His voice is thin, almost apologetic. He says they weren't supposed to stay. They were supposed to be moved again. He keeps using that word, safe, as if saying it might make it true. But the way his voice breaks gives him away. He knows it's a lie even as he says it. And then comes the part no one is prepared for. According to Hale, the boys never made it to their final destination. They disappeared somewhere in the middle. Lost, diverted, or taken. He won't say more. Maybe he can't. But he does offer one thing. The last place he ever saw the 11 altar boys. A location that will drag the investigation into its darkest stretch yet. 40 years have slipped by since the boys first disappeared. For decades of unanswered questions, sealed files, and doors that open only halfway before closing again. Most of the people who held the real answers are gone now, buried with their secrets. What's left sits in climate-controlled archives, waiting for the day someone develops a new DNA method or a new forensic trick, or maybe just enough courage to finally speak. A retired agent puts it plainly. Someone out there still knows the full story. Maybe several people. They've just never come forward. The investigation did what it could. It exposed something rotten hiding inside places people were taught to trust. It forced reforms that came too late for the boys who mattered most. It rattled the public, shook entire dioceses, and sparked waves of outrage and grief, but none of that filled the silence left in those families' homes. You can see the absence everywhere. Empty pews in a church where the boys once served Massachusetts caution tape fluttering around the retreat, its windows staring blankly into the trees. The abandoned camp where their names were carved into old bunk frames. Every place feels like a question that still doesn't have an answer. This case stopped being just a mystery a long time ago. It became a kind of scar, thin but permanent, stretching across communities that tried to move on and couldn't. Their names are still in national databases. Their photos still sit in folders marked active. As long as those files remain open, even quietly, there's a chance someone will break the silence. The final images are simple. Daniel, Thomas, Michael, Joseph, Anthony, 5 faces frozen in childhood, staring just past the camera as if looking for someone they trusted to come get them. And until the day someone steps forward with the truth, their story hangs in the air unfinished.